This week in Idaho, the No Kings protest draws thousands across Idaho. Idaho's SNAP waiver is approved, which means no more soda. And Micron announces a second Boise fab with a $200 billion plan. Plus, an Idaho Bowfisherman breaks the Carp record. That and so much more. This is the Yocal Idaho Midweek Report, where we give you an overview of the news in Idaho for the last week. Welcome! I hope you had a splendid week. If this is the first time you're tuning into us, so glad to have you here with us, and you clicked on this video to learn more about Idaho. Hopefully with that, you've been able to get out and see some of the beautiful state that we have here. This last week, I got to enjoy it and do some fishing over by Fairfield, if you know where that is, and it was beautiful. I don't think Idaho could get any more beautiful, but every time it seems to outdo itself. Plus, I went over to Garden Valley, if I remember my geography correctly, the McCall Cascade area. It looks really pretty there. Granted, I did do some hiking up by Blue Lake, which if you're planning to go that way later this summer, just a little heads up, it's going to be a little bit disappointing. If you remember, there was a fire there last year. I forgot about that and went up there and then realized, oh no, it's like half burned. So when you go down the trail, like the left side is completely burned and the right side's fine. It's sad. It's still pretty. I have no doubt because of the fire, there's probably going to be a ton of wildflowers this year up there because of how the fire does all that with nature and nutrients and different things. It's crazy how that all works out. But it is still sad to see that a lot of it got burnt up there. Thankfully, the area around Blue Lake is not. I digress there. In either case, it was still very pretty. Just a little bit of a sad disclaimer on that one. Hopefully, we don't have as bad of a fire year this year, specifically for the forests and also for our lungs. But that said, and transitioning into our stories for today, the first half, as you probably saw, it's going to be a mix of news. We'll be starting off with the No Kings protest that happened last Saturday, that whole thing, and an encouraging thing with the approval of Idaho's SNAP waiver, something you probably saw on the thumbnail. And then for the middle, we'll have news about EMS, West Valley's CEO dying over in Baltimore. That was a shocking thing. And then also some issues with St. Luke's, plus news on Trump and Idaho's water, particularly with reservoirs and drought, because that's something we have to be more and more careful here out west. And then closing out, we'll have news about a new generator factory here in the Treasure Valley, and how an Idahoan made it to the top of Mount Everest, plus some other stories throughout there, so please stick with us to the end to get those and much more. But starting with the first story, Saturday's No King protest drew surprisingly large crowds across our state, with thousands participating in coordinated anti-administration demonstrations, or anti-Trump ones. The numbers exceeded many expectations, raising some questions about the level of organization behind these events. Looking at the numbers in Boise, approximately 4,000 people gathered at the state capitol. The photos from it were just crazy to see. It was the largest protest since Trump's second term began here in Idaho. And then over in eastern Idaho, it also saw a substantial participation, with around 1,500 in Pocatello, 1,300 in Idaho Falls, and between 500 and 600 in Driggs. Even Coeur d'Alene up north drew over 1,000 protesters. Granted, it would be interesting to see how many of those came across the border. Which, on that, it does raise a question. Some observers have raised theories about whether all the participants were local residents, with social media discussions about possible outside involvement, particularly noting the fact that it's a national group, but how many people they actually brought in for it. These concerns were also echoed on social media and different things as these protests happened across the country. But on a more happy and generally nice note, considering what's happened down in California, despite the large crowds and heated rhetoric, the protests seem to have remained peaceful throughout Idaho when they happened. Attorney General Raul Labrador had warned beforehand that, quote, violence, property destruction, and lawlessness will not be tolerated in Idaho. And it appears his message has been heeded. However, in contrast, over in nearby Spokane, they saw 11 arrests during their protest, which contrasted with the protests that we had here that seemed to have remained reasonably orderly. The peaceful nature of these events reflects well on our law enforcement's preparation to be ready for these events and to keep them civil, and the general civility that Idahoans value, something that seems to be a standard, regardless of political differences in this specific instance. And then going to our main story and great news, the federal government has approved our state's waiver to remove soda, candy, and energy drinks from SNAP benefits. This marks a huge win for common sense health policy here in Idaho. Back in April, Governor Brad Little signed House Bill 109. If you want to look that up, you can go check our bill breakdowns on it, which required our Department of Health and Welfare to seek federal approval for these changes outlined in the bill. The bill passed with strong support, with 48 in favor, 20 against in the House, and 25 in favor and 10 against in the Senate. Now, the U.S. Agricultural Secretary Brooke Rollins and HHS Secretary Robert Kennedy Jr. have officially signed off on Idaho's request. As for what all this means practically, well, starting January 2026, the 132,000 Idahoans who receive SNAP benefits, averaging about $177 per month, won't be able to use their taxpayer dollars on junk food anymore. The waiver defines candy broadly as preparations with sugar or sweeteners combined with chocolate, fruits, or nuts. For soda, it includes any non-alcoholic beverages with sweeteners, but excludes drinks with more than 50% juice or milk-based beverages. This aligns Idaho with the Make America Healthy Again, or MAHA movement, that is gaining momentum nationwide. Our state officials will start meeting with retailers over the next month to prepare these changes. It's about ensuring public funds support health, not harming people. And speaking of money, and in a very large way, our own homegrown tech giant Micron just made headlines again with huge news for Idaho's future. The company announced this last week it will build a second semiconductor fab right here in Boise, part of a massive $200 billion, with a B, expansion across the United States. This second fab joins the first one, already under construction at Micron's headquarters, which should start producing memory chips in 2027. Together, these two plants will help Micron reach its goal of making 40% of its DRAM products domestically. A very encouraging thing, particularly because the thing you're probably watching on this uses DRAM. As for the funding on this, it comes from multiple sources, up to $6.4 billion through the Federal CHIPS Act that Biden signed into office, plus federal manufacturing tax credits, another thing to look into. But here's what's really interesting for us Idahoans. Micron has finally put money behind its community promises. After 3 years of vague talk about helping with housing and transportation, the company announced a $75 million Idaho Community Investment Framework. Funding targets workforce training, STEM education, and community support, though details remain sparse and it sounds like a bunch of buzzwords. But to put it in context, just looking at the money, because that's something we can't understand, compared to their previous commitment contributions, which was just $1 million to Idaho's housing fund. So they've bumped it up quite a bit with that $750 million investment. Though it is odd remembering that Micron promised about $500 million similarly for programs in New York. Granted, they're a little bit more of a liberal state that likes that stuff. Still, though, this represents thousands of high-paying jobs and positions Idaho as a key player in America's semiconductor future, something that is very important as we only seem to be carrying more and more tech in our lives. And stepping out of politics and to the great outdoors for a moment for something us as Idahoans love, fishing, boy do we have a tale for you. Riley Farndon from New Plymouth made history this last week on the Snake River, when he shot and landed a massive grass carp that tipped the scale at nearly 68 pounds. Hopefully we'll pop the photo up there of it. I should get that over to the editor, but it's just crazy. If you need to, go check the link. This wasn't just any fishing trip, as you can guess. Farndon was bow fishing when he spotted the monster fish, which was 68.65 pounds and stretched about 49 inches long with a girth of 32 inches. To put that into a little perspective, this fish absolutely crushed our state's previous archery record of 39.5 pounds. It even beat the traditional rod and reel record by more than 20 pounds. Farndon now holds the crown with this wonderful catch in archery category, and his catch shows how abundant our waters here are in Idaho, or just how bad carp have gotten in them. Depends on which way you want to look at it. Either way, it's another reminder that we live in a state blessed with incredible natural resources and opportunities for recreation, something that many people move here to enjoy. Which, if you like that story about fishing, or the other 4 that we've talked about so far, do us a favor and hit the like button so that we know you enjoyed this episode. Also, if you enjoy learning about Idaho and being engaged in what's going on with it, subscribe and follow us. Hit the button down below on YouTube, Rumble, or Twitter. Helps us stay connected with you, so you could do that and stay engaged with what's going on in Idaho. And then going from fishing to Baltimore, the West Valley Medical Center in Caldwell faces some uncertainty after their CEO, Nicholas Manning, died in Baltimore on June 6th. Police found the 46-year-old at the Marymount Waterfront Hotel and initially called it a possible overdose. However, Manning's family strongly disputes this, claiming they possess evidence that he was murdered. Manning had led the West Valley for only 7 months after HCA Healthcare appointed him in November. He previously served as a chief operating officer at Eastern Idaho's Regional Medical Center. The family's fraud and homicide claim creates some serious questions about what really happened. Baltimore's police say they found no trauma on his body, but medical examiners still need to conduct tests to determine how he died. Moving forward, Isabella Crizzle now serves as the interim CEO while the hospital moves forward. Since HCA Healthcare operates both West Valley and Eastern Idaho Regional, the company provides stability during this transition. The medical center promised to continue Manning's work serving Canyon County patients, though leadership changes always bring challenges. And speaking of the medical industry, and heading a little bit further up north, a frustrating citizen group plans to ask Idaho's Attorney General to investigate how St. Luke's health system uses taxpayer money in McCall. Give Us a Vote, led by State Representative Faye Thompson, will file its complaint in early July, they say. The group argues that since 2016, the McCall Memorial Hospital District has given 100% of its revenue, minus operating costs, directly to St. Luke's. They believe this violates our state's constitution and the district's own rules. Quote, "The reaction of the board to our request has been overwhelming, to say the least," said Dr. Kurt Mesk, one of the group's leaders. For months, they've asked the hospital district board to let voters weigh in on whether the taxing of the district should continue, but the board appears to be stalling. The complaint doesn't ask the Attorney General to dissolve the district, but to determine if the current practice breaks state law. They're collecting petition signatures from property owners until July 22nd, so if you want to jump on that, there's still time. The group questions whether taxpayers should fund St. Luke's ambulance service, urgent care clinic, and employee housing projects. Speaking of ambulances, the Capital City Development Cooperation Board, man, that's a mouthful, rejected Ada County's emergency medical service request to leave 5 urban renewal districts, despite a new state law that was supposed to help. As for what are urban renewal districts, because that's something I had to educate myself on for this, normally property tax gets split between schools, fire departments, and emergency services. But urban renewal districts freeze these baseline taxes and capture any increases from rising property values to fund development projects. This diverts money that could otherwise support emergency services. As for the bill we hinted at earlier, House Bill 436, signed this year, promised fire and ambulance districts that they could withdraw from these arrangements. However, the law includes a catch. Districts can only leave if there are no outstanding debts or obligations. CCDC claims $2.22 million in contractual obligations, while only receiving about $160,000 from EMS property taxes. This means EMS can't withdraw even though they're losing hundreds of thousands that could fund additional paramedics and EMTs. Similar requests across the Treasure Valley have been denied, leaving emergency services still short-funded, despite what the legislation tried to help. And then speaking of funding and the legislature trying to help and going to education, Idaho parents who choose private schools, or homeschooling now, have a powerful new tool to help with costs. If you haven't been listening for a long time, there is the state's parental choice tax credit that gives families up to $5,000 per children for educational expenses. It isn't just a deduction, it is a refundable credit. That means if you don't owe enough in state taxes, you get the money back. Families can use it for tuition, textbooks, tutoring, and curriculum. Kids with special needs qualify for up to $7,500, so a little bit more if the kid's got some needs. And here's what makes it special, though. Anyone can apply, regardless of income. A typical middle-class family could get their entire state tax bill refund and then some. For example, and we'll just speak hypothetically, the Spuds family, for the sake of humor, could save about $5,000 beyond their state taxes. The program caps at about $50 million total, which when you first hear it, it sounds like a lot, but it really isn't in the grand scheme of things. So applications matter if you're going to probably hop on before it runs out. They open in January, with priority going to low-income families first, but that gives parents real choice in how they educate their kids while keeping more money in their pockets. Also, depending on how it performs, it may get expanded next year. We'll have to see. Did you know about the school tax credit or any of the other topics we've talked about in this story so far? If you haven't and someone that should, please don't hesitate to share this episode. It helps us spread the news to more Idahoans and them to be engaged and informed about what's going on in our beautiful state. And then going a little bit more national, President Trump threw his support behind Governor Brad Little this last week, posting on Truth Social that Little has, quote, complete and total endorsement for re-election, end quote. Trump praised Little as, quote, the strong and highly popular governor of Idaho. This early endorsement appears to carry some weight to it. Now, for context, and you may remember, Trump stayed out of Little's 2018 primary race and actually endorsed Janice McGeachin against Little in 2022. But Little has worked hard to earn Trump's favor, making multiple trips to Washington, D.C., and even visiting Mar-a-Lago before the inauguration. The timing does matter, though. With the 2026 primary still a year away, Trump's early backing sends a message to potential challengers. Little hasn't officially announced his third-term bid yet, but this endorsement does confirm what many had expected, that he was going to run. And then coming back to Idaho, specifically the Treasure Valley and money, the West Valley Humane Society has stunned Caldwell officials by demanding they pay $540,000 annually instead of the current $68,250, a shocking 700% increase. The shelter claims this massive jump is non-negotiable, end quote, and represents, quote, the minimum amount required, end quote, to continue services. But here's what should concern taxpayers even more. This same organization lost over $600,000 in 2023 due to poor financial management. They spent far more than they brought in, with nearly $1.6 million going to salaries and benefits alone. Now, they expect Caldwell residents to bail them out, even though this increase would saddle the city with higher per capita costs than Nampa or Canyon County. Even worse, meeting their demands would prevent our police and fire departments here in Caldwell from hiring important personnel needed to hopefully keep our communities safe. Caldwell received little advance notice of this massive increase, making budget planning nearly impossible. As stewards of our tax dollars, the city officials are rightly seeking public input at a town hall they had yesterday, and another one on June 30th before making any decisions on this big price tag. And then going over to eastern Idaho about water, Senator Kevin Cook has a bold vision. Stop sending our water to the ocean and store it here in Idaho instead. His Senate Joint Memorial 101 calls for new dams and reservoirs, including rebuilding the infamous Teton Dam that failed catastrophically in 1976. Cook argues we need this infrastructure to survive droughts, support our farmers, and power our growing communities. The plan passed both chambers unanimously, a rare unity in today's political climate. Granted, it's a memorial, so it doesn't really have a particular call to action. It's just more of a statement of faith. And even Rexburg's Mayor Jerry Merrill, who remembers the original disaster, now supports rebuilding because, quote, those things it was built for are more of a need now, end quote. But how would this actually happen? Cook's federal meetings revealed skepticism from Congress, who told him to, quote, make more noise, end quote, before acting. Previous studies have shown similar projects struggling with cost-benefit ratios that don't pencil down. Cook admits it'll take about 10 years minimum. While the vision is sound, we should steward our resources wisely, and the political and financial hurdles remain steep. Good stewardship requires both vision and realism for things you can actually achieve, so we'll have to see how this progresses. And speaking about development and coming back to Boise, the city council there has just approved changes that would make teeny homes on wheels legal within city limits. This marks a shift from the previous ban on these housing options. City staff originally proposed allowing one teeny home per lot, but council members went further. City Council President Colin Nash pushed to allow 2 teeny homes per lot as long as they meet dimensional standards. The Planning and Zoning Commission had already expanded the proposal to include mixed-use zones. All public comments seem to show support for the change, with residents praising teeny homes for their affordability and flexibility. Nash shared how his grandfather lived in a camper in their backyard 2 decades after a heart attack ended his trucking career. While this arrangement wasn't technically legal then, it kept his grandfather housed near family. The council recognized that not everyone can afford traditional housing. These changes hopefully give Idahoans more options when circumstances demand creative solutions. The teeny homes must be under 400 square feet and connected to permanent utilities to apply. You've made it to this point in the Midweek Report, which, probably means you love stuff about Idaho, so you should just hit the subscribe button so you can follow us for more content and keep up with us. Also, you could just head over to our Substack and check that out, because there's tons of fun content over there that comes out more regularly than our midweek. And then going a little bit darker, sadly, that's sin for you. A former Idaho Department of Corrections officer now faces felony charges after prosecutors accused her of engaging in sexual contact with an inmate at the Idaho State Corrections Center. Court documents allege a 37-year-old officer had sexual contact with a 31-year-old inmate in March. The charges violate Idaho Code 18-6110, which prohibits sexual contact between correctional staff and incarcerated individuals. Ironically, the officer was celebrated by IDOC in 2023 as president of a graduating class, where she told peers to, quote, always serve with integrity, honor, and fairness, end quote. Maybe that didn't age well. We'll have to see how the case comes. It does highlight broader concerns about professional boundaries within our correctional system. IDOC Director Bree Derricks recently emphasized that officers must maintain professional relations with inmates. The former officer is currently out on bond with no court date scheduled yet. IDOC has not responded to questions about whether they track similar misconduct cases. This incident underscores the importance of maintaining the highest ethical standards in positions of public trust. And then turning back to good news, and over in Nampa, yesterday marked a big day for manufacturing here in the Treasure Valley as JTS held their ribbon-cutting ceremony for their brand new facility in Nampa. It is a 172,000 square foot operation that JTS built specifically to make generator enclosures. JTS, which is part of a mission-critical group, invested about $55 million in this Nampa plant, and they're bringing about 140 good-paying jobs to the area, which is very encouraging to hear, especially with housing prices. What makes this facility special is that it doubles JTS's capacity to build protective housings that go around backup generators, which, when you think about these generators, you might be thinking of some small one that you take when you go fishing or when the power goes out to plug up for your house. But we're talking about generators that power systems that keep hospitals online when the lights go out, or backup power for data centers that handle everything from Netflix, as you're enjoying that, to AI systems and applications. President Craig Blake says that they've seen tremendous growth in demand, especially since COVID drove more data center construction. The company already operates in Caldwell, but this new Nampa facility lets them focus entirely on generator enclosures while their Caldwell plant handles other products. And also staying in Caldwell, we're seeing what happens when the community steps up to solve a real problem. After Memorial Pool had to close just days after reopening because they couldn't find enough lifeguards, the city partnered with our local Lions Club to remove barriers that keep people from getting certified. The biggest one being the cost. The Lions Club agreed to cover the $250 certification fee for 10 community members. Tiffany D. France from Parks and Recreation called it a win-win. Young people get valuable skills and summer jobs, while families get safe swimming. The certification class runs through Saturday. If you know someone or yourself who could benefit, they can apply through Caldwell's website. Sometimes the best solutions come from neighbors helping neighbors, and this is probably a good example of that. And coming to our last story and our fun one, Eva Steinwald from Eagle just proved that age is just a number. At 63, she climbed Mount Everest and briefly held the record as the oldest American woman to reach the summit. Quite impressive. But the journey wasn't easy. Eva spent years preparing and over 6 weeks in Nepal, letting her body adjust to the altitude. She walked 35 miles from the landing strip to base camp and climbed about 9,000 feet to nearly 18,000 feet. Along the way, food poisoning forced her helicopter down to recover. Avalanche blocked her path through dangerous ice falls, but Eva pushed through every obstacle. As for her words on this, quote, "We all have Everests," Eva said. "Whatever that Everest is for you, believe in yourself and don't listen to the naysayers," end quote. Eva climbs to honor her late husband, a Vietnam veteran whose dog tag she wears on every climb. She also wants to raise awareness about global warming. Mount Everest marks her 3rd summit as she works towards climbing the highest peaks on every continent. Her story reminds us that with faith, determination, and the Lord's blessing, we can overcome any mountain put before us. And speaking of mountains, I've got a couple to go climb myself, metaphorically and literally. So thank you for listening to the entire report. I sincerely hope you found it valuable and enjoyable. If you like the Midweek Report, make sure to check out our other content on Substack. Also, if we missed any important points or provided incorrect information, please feel free to reach out to us via email at localyocalidaho on Twitter or via email. With the small team we have, we're not able to cover everything, but we do our best to cover the most interesting and important stories. Thank you for your continued support and assistance. That's all for now, and I wish you a fantastic rest of your week. Godspeed.